It happened on a Tuesday. 2 p.m. I was debugging a memory leak that had been haunting our platform for weeks, my headphones still halfway off when the notification popped up. Subject line: Role alignment notice. Immediate. No meeting. No call. No context. Just 6 lines of cold, corporate language quietly detonating in my inbox. Effective immediately. Your position is no longer aligned with Atria's strategic vision. Your access has been revoked. Please collect personal belongings by 5 p.m. My mouse froze. My heartbeat didn't. 15 years. 15 years of building their infrastructure, cleaning up after short-sighted managers, designing systems that kept their entire company online. And now, I was erased in a click. No goodbye. No thank you. Not even a human voice. And here's the part that still stings. I wasn't surprised. Not really. The new COO, Kayla Benton, had been circling like a hawk for months, shaking up departments, repackaging other people's work into glossy reports, and claiming visionary leadership. I had seen it coming. I just didn't think it would be this disposable. I sat there, staring at the screen. My monitor still glowing with server logs I was supposed to fix. And I thought, did they really think this would end quietly? Because what they didn't know, what Kayla had never even asked, was that for the past 8 months, I had been documenting every architectural decision I made, every line of code, every system innovation. And I had filed 7 patents under my name, covering the exact platform they were now trying to take public. They fired the wrong engineer, and they had no idea what it was about to cost them. If you've ever been blindsided by a layoff, dropped without warning or respect, share your story below. You're not alone, and it's time we start talking about it. Because this isn't just a story about getting fired. It's about what happens when the person you erase turns out to be the one holding all the keys. Before the email, before the patents, before the silence, there was just me. Natalie Quinn, platform architect, problem solver, the one you call when your system is on fire and your dev team has already tried everything twice. When Atria Systems brought me in, they were drowning. Customer data was leaking between tenants. Latency spikes were killing real-time features. Their infrastructure was like a 100-year-old mansion with new paint and termites in the walls. They didn't need innovation. They needed a lifeline. And that was me. I relocated from Seattle to Denver for this role. Left my freelance contracts, paused my open source project, even gave up a decent shot at a senior role at a startup I'd helped launch. But Atria had the one thing I couldn't resist, a technical disaster that no one else could fix. In my first 3 months, I rebuilt their entire authentication framework from the ground up. No more Frankenstein APIs duct taped together. I introduced real-time syncing across distributed clusters, replaced their monolithic database with scalable shards, and wrote protocols that kept the platform alive even during blackouts. They didn't know what half of it meant, but they liked that the platform stopped crashing. Still, my name was rarely in the update emails. In the all-hands meetings, when the CTO praised engineering's heroic effort, they always meant the guy who optimized the front-end loading time by half a second. I was somewhere at the bottom of the credits, if I made it in at all. But that was fine. I wasn't there for the spotlight. At least, not at first. The shift came slowly, like a cold front rolling in. It started with Kayla Benton, newly hired Chief Operating Officer. Sleek, corporate, brilliant in a conference room, lethal in a strategy deck. She didn't understand tech, but she understood how to own the room. She started reshuffling teams, redrawing .org charts, and inserting herself into every product review. And she hated ambiguity. She wanted dashboards with color-coded graphs, progress bars, and 6-week timelines that made engineering look clean and controllable. My team didn't fit in her narrative. And I especially didn't. Because I didn't talk in bullet points or market-ready metaphors. I explained things like packet flow, thread contention, and latency bottlenecks. So, she started bypassing me. speaking directly to mid-level engineers, rewording our architecture decisions into her own strategy slides, and presenting them to the board like she'd conjured them in a dream. At first, I thought I was imagining it, until I saw one of my diagrams hand-drawn, annotated, timestamped in a slide in her quarterly presentation. No credit. Not even a mention. I didn't say anything. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew exactly what I was building, and how much it was worth. They saw me as just another quiet engineer in the corner. But every day, line by line, I was becoming the backbone of their business. And that's the thing about backbones. You don't notice them until they're gone. It started with a line of code I didn't write, but I recognized it instantly. I was deep into refactoring the authentication layer of the nastiest parts of Atria's backend. Legacy code tangled with half-documented libraries, wrapped in error handling that hadn't been updated since 2014. My job was to rebuild the foundation, strip out what wasn't stable, and design something secure, scalable, and clean. So I dug. And then I paused. The syntax was oddly familiar comments written in the exact shorthand I used. Indentation, structure, even variable naming conventions uncanny. I opened a private terminal and cross-checked it against one of my archived GitHub repositories. It wasn't similar. It was identical. A chunk of the current production system was lifted straight from a personal framework I developed 2 years ago. One that was never made public. Private repo. Custom license. Internal use only. That shouldn't have been possible. Unless someone took it. I scrolled further. There were more. Tiny fragments scattered across modules, some edited slightly, some left untouched. It was like someone had downloaded my brain, chopped it into pieces, and buried it inside a codebase that now served 500,000 users. At first, I thought maybe I'd accidentally pushed something to a public repo. Or maybe I'd recycled my own logic too cleanly. But no. This wasn't reuse. This was theft. And it hit me hard not just because it was my code, but because this was what Atria was building their future on. My work. Folded into their platform. No attribution. No license. No permission. I remember walking into Kayla's office that afternoon. She was on a call, staring at a wall of performance dashboards on her second monitor. "Hey, do you have a sec?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She muted her call and glanced up, clearly irritated. "Make it quick." I laid it out. Not angrily. Not accusing. Just the facts. Some of the core components they were running were copied from a proprietary framework I had written prior to joining Atria. I had evidence. Timestamps. Repo history. She didn't even blink. "Oh, that's an IP thing. Legal handles that stuff," she said, waving a hand as if brushing off lint. "Just focus on getting the system stable." Then she unmuted her call and turned back to the screen. That was the moment I knew. They didn't care where the innovation came from. As long as it worked. As long as they could profit. So I did what every overlooked engineer dreams of, but rarely has the nerve to act on. I started documenting every decision, every commit, every design choice I made from that day forward. I registered new modules under separate IP records, filed invention disclosures, and began the long, quiet process of turning my contributions into protected assets with my name on them. They wanted me to just make it work. Fine. I would. And I'd make sure they'd have to pay to keep it. The meeting room was already full when I walked in. Board members in suits. Department heads on edge. Marketing had laid out branded notebooks, complimentary pens, and those little glass bottles of imported water that only show up when investors are in the building. Quarter strategy review. The kind of meeting where no one really listens unless there's money on the line. I took a seat in the back. No one expected me to speak. I wasn't on the agenda. I was just engineering. The person who made it work after everyone else was done talking. Kayla Benton stood at the front. Her blazer was sharp. Her hair was perfect. Her voice, clear and confident, She started her slide deck with market positioning and revenue projections, then moved to platform performance. That's when it happened. The slide blinked on, and I stopped breathing for half a second. It was mine. The diagram, the schema layout, the modular architecture of our new authentication system color-coded, with annotations in my handwriting, scanned directly from the whiteboard in my office. She had taken a photo, cleaned it up, and dropped it into her slide deck like a trophy she'd found on the street. This, she said, gesturing toward the screen, is what positions us for scale. This distributed framework is the foundation of our next-generation platform. She didn't mention my name. She didn't have to, because no one in that room even knew I existed. I sat frozen. Half of me wanted to stand up and call it out. The other half just watched. She kept going, explaining latency thresholds I had tuned manually, citing load balancing stats I'd spent sleepless nights collecting, speaking with authority about a system she didn't understand but knew would sound impressive to the board. The CEO nodded. One VP clapped. They loved it. And for a moment, I felt like I was watching someone else's movie. Like I'd slipped into an alternate reality where I was invisible, and someone else was getting credit for the single most difficult piece of engineering I'd ever done. It wasn't just infuriating. It was humiliating. But I didn't speak. Not that day. Because that diagram, that system, that presentation, I already had patents pending. Documentation. Time-stamped commits. A legal trail. They hadn't seen coming. Let them celebrate. Let them build their empire on what they thought they owned. I walked out of the room before the meeting ended. No one noticed. And as I stepped into the hallway, one thought kept circling in my mind. You only get to steal from me once. Enzerin. 2 weeks after the presentation, I was eating a late lunch at my desk, a sad little salad with too much dressing and not enough green when I heard it. Voices through the wall. My office backed up against Kayla's. The walls weren't soundproof. They never were. That day, I wasn't even trying to eavesdrop. I was just trying to finish my lunch without reviewing memory leak logs for once. Then I heard it. We're estimating a valuation around $1.2 billion. My fork froze. Another voice chimed in, probably Trent, the CEO. That number's contingent on the IP scan coming back clean. We can't risk exposure with the Japanese group watching everything. Kayla replied, cool and casual. The platform is 100% internal. Clean build. Proprietary from start to finish. Nothing externally sourced. No licensing issues. That was the moment I felt something shift inside me. Like a pin had dropped into place. Or maybe like a landmine had just been stepped on and the countdown had begun. I slowly stood up and stared at the wall. This wasn't just about recognition anymore. It wasn't about credit or visibility or a line in a press release. They were taking my WorkMe architecture, my algorithms, my security protocols and using it to secure a $1 billion valuation. And they were planning to go public on it. To sell it. To offer it up to investors as a wholly owned asset. All while pretending I didn't exist. I closed my laptop. I didn't finish the salad. That night, at home, I opened my patent tracker. 7 applications. 3 pending. 1 approved last week. All tied directly to the foundation of the platform Atria was preparing to IPO. Distributed authentication. Dynamic load balancing. Real-time sync between cloud shards. They didn't own any of it. And they didn't even know. I scrolled through the documents, the GitHub commits, the invention disclosures I'd quietly filed with the help of a pro bono IP consultant 6 months ago. Everything was in place. All I had to do was flip the switch. But before I did anything, I needed backup. Someone who knew the terrain. Someone who didn't blink when big companies played dirty. So I called Marcia Ellison, patent attorney, Silicon Valley veteran, and someone whose LinkedIn recommendations used words like brutal, surgical, and unshakable. I sent her a secure link with all my documentation. 20 minutes later, she called me back. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "Oh," she said. "They have no idea what they're standing on, do they?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because now, it wasn't just me versus a corporation. It was me and the law versus a company about to bet its entire future on stolen foundations. If your company was about to IPO using your work without your name on it, what would you do? Comment below. I really want to hear your thoughts. Marcia Ellison didn't waste time. We met the next morning at her office in Palo Alto. Frosted glass, quiet conference room, a single orchid blooming in the corner. It didn't look like the kind of place where wars started. But I was holding a folder that could ignite one. I laid out everything. The patents, the GitHub commits, the email chains showing prior art, the timeline that made one thing painfully clear. I had designed and documented the core components of Atria's platform before they even hired me. Marcia didn't interrupt. She didn't nod for effect. She just flipped through each document like a surgeon reading an MRI. Precise. Unemotional. When she finally looked up, her tone was measured but sharp. "This is clean," she said. "They're exposed on multiple fronts: copyright, patent violation, and willful misattribution. If they knew any of this and still moved forward." She tapped one of the filing receipts. "You filed this 3 weeks before your contract start date." I nodded. "And you never signed any document assigning IP to Atria?" "Nothing beyond standard employment language. No specific invention disclosures. No targeted projects." She smiled. A small, knowing smile. "Then we own it. Entirely. Everyone." I sat back in my chair and exhaled. Not in relief. In readiness. Because now I wasn't just angry. I was armed. Marcia wasted no time. That afternoon, she drafted a formal notice of patent ownership and potential infringement addressed to Atria Systems' General Counsel. It was clean, cold, surgical in tone. She attached the relevant filings, highlighted the overlap between my patent claims and the live platform code, and closed with a clear warning. Any commercialization, transfer, or sale of this technology without the express licensing consent of the patent holder will constitute a violation of federal IP law and will trigger immediate legal action. She hit send at 2:1 p.m. At 2:29, her office received a reply marked urgent. By 3:00, Atria's lawyers were requesting an emergency meeting. I declined. Let them squirm. Because the truth was, the minute they'd filed for IPO using that code, they'd put themselves on the clock. Patent law doesn't care about boardroom spin or investor decks. It cares about attribution, and ownership, and dates. And my name? It was on every page that mattered. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I didn't go on LinkedIn to rant about toxic workplaces. I just let Marcia do what she does best: turn facts into pressure. By that evening, rumors were already swirling. A potential patent conflict. An internal review delay. Quiet whispers in Slack channels that legal was taking a second look at things. Good. Let them look. Because the foundation they'd built their future on, it wasn't theirs. And I was about to remind them what it cost to steal from an engineer who documents everything. The next 48 hours were quiet. Too quiet. At first, I thought maybe they were stalling, hoping I'd blink. Or maybe they were still trying to wrap their heads around what just hit them. But by day 3, the signs started to show. The Friday all-hands meeting was suddenly canceled. The investor Q&A webinar that had been scheduled for the following week? Postponed indefinitely. And by Monday morning, I got word from a former colleague, someone still on the inside, that legal had taken over the 8th floor conference room and locked it down until further notice. Atria Systems was officially in panic mode. And panic is messy. That afternoon, Marcia forwarded me a letter, this time from Atria's legal department. The tone was different, less polished, more desperate. They were demanding a full list of all systems I had worked on while employed at Atria. They cited the company's intellectual property clause, the standard boilerplate you see in every tech contract, claiming that since I built the components during company hours, they belong to the company. Marcia wasn't impressed. She opened her reply with a single sentence. Your interpretation of the contract is incorrect and demonstrably so. Then she attached time-stamped GitHub commits, personal repositories, work-in-progress logs dated weeks, even months, before I signed my first contract with Atria. She included drafts of invention disclosures, emails to mentors, and even an internal Slack conversation with a previous employer who had passed on the architecture idea I later patented. The kind of documentation no PR team can spin. The kind of facts even the best paid attorneys can't unwrite. Still, they tried. The next day, Kayla called me. She never called. Not once in the entire year we worked together. But that morning, my phone lit up with her name. I let it ring the first time. Then the second. By the third, I picked up just out of curiosity. Natalie, she said, her voice tight but composed. We need to have a conversation. About aligning incentives, avoiding unnecessary legal battles. We're all on the same side here. That made me laugh. I didn't mean to, but it slipped out. Since when? I asked. There was silence. Then she pivoted. You developed these technologies while on company time. I brought them with me, I replied. You just never asked where they came from. Another pause. Look, this is a misunderstanding. We're willing to be reasonable if you're willing to meet us halfway. I didn't answer right away. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about compromise. I was thinking about the board members who clapped for her. The headlines they were planning. The millions they were projecting off work they never built. So, I said, if by halfway you mean full recognition, fair licensing fees, and a signed statement admitting the IP is mine, then maybe. She didn't respond. Just exhaled. And hung up. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Because what they were finally realizing too late was that you can't build your empire on someone else's blueprint and expect the foundation to stay silent. The first crack didn't come from me. It came from the press. Tuesday morning, TechCurrent weekly own of the most respected insider publications in Silicon Valley ran a short article with a loaded headline. Patent dispute delays Atria IPO. K architect may not be internal. It didn't name names. But it didn't have to. Anyone who knew the platform knew who built it. And the implication was enough to rattle investors, analysts, and half of Twitter. By noon, the article had been picked up by Wired, Protocol, and 2 VC newsletters. By evening, Business Insider had a feature titled, Stolen Code, Shaky Valuations. Is Atria's billion-dollar dream built on borrowed brilliance? I didn't leak anything. Neither did Marcia. But someone inside did. Someone who was tired of the lies, or maybe just scared of being collateral damage. The pressure mounted fast. Investors pulled out of preliminary agreements. The Japanese firm that had been circling the acquisition hit pause. And, in Slack, channels across the company, screenshots of the articles were being passed around like wildfire. Then came the internal review. A special committee, handpicked by the board, tasked with one job, to determine whether Kayla Benton had knowingly misrepresented the company's intellectual property. The irony? She was the one who always insisted on tight messaging, controlled narratives, no surprises. Jays, now she was the surprise. From what I heard, they combed through her emails, her presentation decks, even meeting transcripts. They found the whiteboard photo, the scan diagram that matched my patent filing, the language she used in investor calls that mirrored my invention summaries word for word. They even found a Slack message where a junior engineer had asked her if they needed IP clearance for one of the modules. She replied, "We're covered, just tell them it's proprietary." Ulk. 3 days later, she was gone. No public statement. No farewell email. Just a quiet message from the CEO in the next all hands. Kayla Benton will be stepping down to pursue new opportunities. Everyone knew what that meant. But what really struck me wasn't the fall. It was the silence that followed it. The LinkedIn buzz stopped. The marketing campaign vanished overnight. And suddenly, nobody wanted to talk about Kayla's vision or Kayla's leadership. I do. She had built her influence like a house of mirror smoke, reflection, illusion. And the moment the lights came on, it all collapsed. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe part of me did. But mostly, I just felt tired. Because for months, she'd taken credit for my work. Built her reputation on the back of something she never touched. And now that truth was coming to the surface, not as an apology, not as accountability, but as damage control. Still, it was a start. One domino had fallen. And the next one? It was going to cost them millions. The email subject line read, Private inquiry regarding patent portfolio, Kinzoku Tech. It landed quietly one Thursday morning, nestled between junk updates from mailing lists I'd forgotten I subscribed to. I almost deleted it. But then I saw the sender. Tomo Hoshino, Director of Strategic Acquisitions, Kinzoku Tech North America. They weren't just a tech giant. They were the tech giant, the ones who'd been circling Atria for months with rumors of a $400 million acquisition. Except now, they weren't talking to Atria anymore. They were talking to me. The body of the message was brief but deliberate. We're conducting due diligence regarding your patent filings and would appreciate a confidential conversation regarding potential licensing terms. Our legal counsel has reviewed the filings, and your name is attached to several components we consider core to our interest. Translation? They'd seen the patents. And they didn't want to buy Atria's story anymore. They wanted to buy mine. We met the next day at a coffee shop in Soma. Neutral ground. No offices. No press. Tomo arrived exactly on time. Crisp suit. Calm demeanor. A thick folder under one arm. We didn't bother with small talk. We've confirmed that several of the core technologies Atria pitched during investor meetings match your filings, he said, placing the folder on the table. We'd like to discuss exclusive licensing directly with you. Just like that. No fluff. No politics. Just recognition. I asked the obvious question. What happens to Atria? Tomo paused for a moment. Then said, almost too softly, that depends on whether they're willing to license from you. Otherwise, they may have to rebuild their entire infrastructure. From scratch. I didn't smile. But I also didn't flinch. Because in that moment, I realized the shift was complete. I wasn't the employee who got erased. I wasn't the back-end girl in the shadows. I was the architect. The IP holder. The one they needed. Tomo slid over a printed offer. Upfront fee. Ongoing royalties. Attribution rights, with my name on every technical rollout using the protocol suite. And then he asked, would you consider becoming our CTO for North America? I stared at the paper, not answering right away. Because this wasn't just a job offer. It was a reversal of power. The story flipping mid-sentence. They weren't offering me a seat at the table. They were asking me to build the next table. If you were in my position, sit aligned, underestimated, then suddenly holding the cards, would you take the deal or walk away? Let me know in the comments. I want to know what you would do. The collapse didn't come all at once. It was slow. Uneven. Like a tower of glass cracking from the inside before anyone sees it fall. The first blow was legal. Kinzoku Tech's announcement hit the wires on a Monday morning. Exclusive licensing agreement secured with original inventor of distributed authentication platform. My name was in the headline. Not as a footnote. Not as a quote. But as the lead. Within hours, Atria's general counsel received a formal cease and desist outlining that they had 30 days to secure their own licensing agreement with me or face patent infringement litigation. They didn't even try to dispute it this time. They knew. The second blow came from inside. Without Kayla, and with the board fractured, there was no leadership left to contain the fallout. Engineering teams were frozen. Marketing canceled their campaign rollout. The IPO was officially shelved. I heard from a friend that someone on the finance team had a panic attack during a budget review. They'd already spent close to $3 million preparing for the public offering. Now it was vapor. Then came the money. Atria had no leverage. No way to delay, negotiate, or distract. They ended up signing a licensing deal under pressure $38 million upfront, plus $24 million annually. Not because they wanted to, but because without it, their entire product stack would go dark. But it was too late to save them. Kinzoku Tech pulled their acquisition offer 2 days after our agreement went public. Investors fled. Shareholders started asking questions. And just like that, Atria went from a $400 million unicorn in the making to a liability nobody wanted. 3 weeks later, they sold what was left to a private equity firm for $89 million. Barely enough to cover debt and exit packages. The name Atria Systems didn't even survive the transition. It was dissolved. Absorbed. Erased. Kayla Benton never made a public appearance again. Her LinkedIn now says, consulting, strategy, and growth. Which is business speak for no one's hiring me right now. As for Trent, the CEO, he resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. The con. He's now doing keynote talks at second-tier conferences and, according to rumor, selling B2B insurance in Phoenix. I didn't celebrate. Not really. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. About consequences. They tried to erase me. Not just my role, not just my name, but the value I brought. The systems I built. The backbone I became. They thought if they stripped away access, wiped my badge, and cut me from the Slack channels, I'd just disappear. But what they didn't understand was this. I had already built something they could never delete. And now, they had to pay to use it. The irony? I probably would have given it to them open source. No charge if they had just treated me like I mattered. But they didn't. And now, they know what that costs. The new office wasn't flashy. It didn't have neon lights or a giant digital dashboard on the wall. No private bar. No tech bro energy. Just clean lines, natural light, and a quiet hum from the servers down the hall. But it had a view. A wide window overlooking San Francisco Bay Ski meeting water in a line so calm, so steady, it almost made the last year feel like a different lifetime. I sat behind the desk on my first day as Chief Technology Officer of Kinzoku Tech North America. No one questioned if I deserved to be there. No one asked me to explain my credentials or sell the vision. I didn't need to pitch anymore. I was the pitch. The first thing I unpacked was a small frame. Patent certificate number, US 107771933. Distributed Authentication Protocol for Multi-Tenant Systems. My name etched cleanly across the bottom. Next to it, I placed something a little less official. A printed copy of the email from Atria. The one that said I was no longer aligned with their strategic direction. The irony still made me smile. That phrase so cold, so corporate had turned out to be the most important permission slip of my life. It set me free. It cut me loose from a place that never saw me clearly. And it forced me to bet on myself in a way I never had before. Now, my name wasn't buried in a Jira ticket or a slide deck. It was on patents, on licensing agreements, on keynote speaker lists and engineering panels and articles that began, Natalie Quinn, the architect behind. But I wasn't chasing headlines. That had never been the point. The real win? I got to build. For a company that respected the people behind the product. For a team that asked questions, gave credit, and shared responsibility. And for a future I finally felt like I owned. It was quiet power. Not the kind that yells in boardrooms, but the kind that shows up in clean code, secure systems, and decisions that don't compromise ethics for speed. Every now and then, I'd get a LinkedIn request from someone at Atria. A former manager. A junior dev who saw it all happen. Some just wanted to congratulate me. Others, maybe just wanted to remember that it was real. that what happened had consequences. I didn't block them. I didn't reply either. Because some stories don't need a second chapter. They just need closure. And from where I sat, sunlight filtering in, architecture diagrams open on my tablet, new ideas already forming. Closure felt like this. Quiet, steady, and entirely mine. They say business isn't personal, that it's all about efficiency, margin, scalability. That if you want to succeed, you have to grow thicker skin. Detach. Don't take it to heart. But here's what they don't teach in business school. People build systems, not logos, not spreadsheets. People. And when you treat those people like parts interchangeable, disposable, silent, you build on something fragile. That's the lesson. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, proved myself through execution alone, eventually someone would notice. Someone would say, "She's the one. She built that." But they didn't. And when they didn't, I learned to stop waiting. I learned that recognition doesn't come from hoping. It comes from documenting, protecting, and believing in your work enough to stand by it out loud. I'm not bitter. Not anymore. Because the truth is, I won. Not because I sued them. Not because I watched their valuation implode. But because when everything else was stripped away, the job title, the access, the paycheck, my work still stood. My mind still mattered. And my name was still on the blueprint. They said it wasn't personal. But it was. Because when you pour your life into a system, when you skip dinners, cancel vacations, solve problems at 2 a.m., because no one else can, you're not just doing a job. You're building something that carries your fingerprint. That is personal. And they treated that like it was nothing. So I showed them what nothing costs. But here's the part that really matters. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to know your worth. And build from there. If you're an engineer, a designer, a creator, and you've ever been talked over, passed by, dismissed, I see you. And more importantly, I believe you. Because I've been there. And if no one's ever told you this, let me be the first. Your work matters. Your ideas matter. And the world runs on things built by people just like you. Quietly, brilliantly, invisibly. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever had to reclaim your worth the hard way, share your experience in the comments. Let's make sure the people who build the future don't have to fight for credit anymore.